Yeah, I mean, looking at the season, I guess, because we can look back on it now because it's officially over. How did it
Yeah.
go for the various, like the 16s, 18s, and 23s? How were the 16s getting along when the season ended?
Yeah, the 16s had an outstanding season. They've done really well. I think out of that group, Finn Mooney played in the under-18s as a Teo, and they've had good seasons, particularly those two players playing up. The 18s had just gone on to a great run of form. I think they were sort of 8 unbeaten. And I'm sure had that continued, would have made the playoffs. We had a couple of defining games, but just never got to that period. And then I just think the 23s had a really sort of result-wise had a tough time due to the fact of the team being so young. In large spells, we were missing 4 or 5 for the older players. And when you look at what their season, they lost so many games in the last 10 minutes. And I just think that's when you put out a young side, physically and mentally, they do struggle in the last quarter of the games, which I think that reflected in the results. But we're really hopeful. Tariq Mitchell's, I think he's impressed in training, and we just really hope he might get an opportunity in 9 games.
Didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think John's more circumstantial in terms of we haven't got a lot of forwards at the senior level, so John's, in terms of training numbers, is ideal. But I think Tariq's there on merit at the moment. I mean, it's interesting where we signed him because Brentford went under their academy. You're probably aware they run without one. It was a particularly summer, the day after the cup final against Manchester United. We met him at Wembley on the Monday and then signed him. He was in competition with Norwich and Tottenham. So it would be a really good success story if he gets on the pitch. So we sort of signed him a little bit blind, but we'd heard really good things about him when we'd done our due diligence. And yeah, it'd be great if he gets a go.
Yeah, Roy really likes him, doesn't he? Because even though he got injured at the start of the season, when he came back, he was back training with the first team straight away.
Yeah, and he has had some injuries that have really curtailed his seasons. He's probably only played 20 game seasons in the three seasons he's been with us. Whereas normally you want your better players to hit 30, 40 games a season. But he's stayed on track, and I did see a huge difference in him when he played in the 23s. I think we played away at Bristol in one of his comeback games in February, and it really left a mark when he was coming away from the ground, thinking he's got major quality, in terms of his passing from deep. And we've always known he's a great 1v1 defender. He can match anyone's pace, and he doesn't dive in. He stands up well. So I think if he can just improve his contributions to the team going forwards, he could be a really good left back.
And John, as you said, not that many forwards around the club, but he's big for his age, isn't he?
John's and he likes physical contact. He plays with his back to goal, and some forwards don't quite like that unknown when the centre half's going to bump them or nick in front of them or come over the top of them and you get caught by an elbow. But John really likes physical contact, so he's really suited to the position. I think Paddy had done some good work with him on his runs into the box, getting across the near post, and I think he'd added some goals, in that spell just before we got broke up. So no, he is a good prospect, John, because he's got size, pace, and great technical ability. He can ping the ball left and right foot. But just like all forwards, he's just got to get his goals to game ratio, in the 1 to 3, 1 to 4 areas, and I think John will be fine. But I do think this 16s group, Chris, is really exciting that's coming in. I don't think we've ever had a group that's had so many potential players in there. We're not talking potentially for Palace, but league players, that you're really confident boys can go and get a career in professional football. You could call on any number of 8 at the moment that look that way.
So is that the team that won the Floodlit Cup last year?
Yeah, that's the team, yeah. So it's exciting. The facilities, that group of players coming in, it's all coming together. And the academy's grown in terms of staff, resources and support. So there's a really good feeling. I think if we can get if we can get a debut between now and the end of the season, and someone goes in and does well, it would just give the whole thing a great lift going into next season.
They're doing a lot of work on the inside of the buildings while everyone's away.
Yeah, we hope that when we go back in August, that the classrooms, the gymnasium, the offices for the staff, the dressing rooms for the players will all be done. So aesthetically, it will look fantastic for when the players return. And then the Astro, the big dome might be a little while because that requires more work going into it. But the AstroTurf will be there for us as well, which would be a great resource for the whole academy from under 8s to 23s. So I think the slight delay in going back from the pandemic will help us because our facilities will be closer for us to use. So it'll be really positive.
I mean, this is what you've wanted for 15 years now, isn't it?
Yeah. It is what it is. It's been really difficult to acquire land in London, isn't it? And I think certainly when we got to the Premier League, the chairman's been working on it. We thought we were going to go to HSBC, and that sort of like consumed us for the first 2 years in the Premier League. And then it didn't happen. It fell at the football term 90th minute. And we've then had to search for alternatives, and we finally done a deal with Goals. It's took this period of time, but yeah, we can now look and act like every other Premier League academy.
When you're trying to recruit players, how much do their parents want to know about the facilities, and how much of a pull is it? Because obviously we know that there's such a high percentage of English players in the Premier League that are from South London that have gone to other clubs. How much of a difference is it going to make?
I think it makes a big difference. I think the quality of work that you give them is also a deciding factor. But the biggest, the facilities with the right scouting. Now, again, year one into the Premier League, the chairman authorised like a revamp of the recruitment, and we went from spending 20,000 to 250,000. So it's a huge leap, and I think that's what's been reflected in that 16s group. It takes 4 years really to impact your academy through scouting, because it's very hard to recruit boys at 18, 17, 16 in the top end of the academy, because those boys have found clubs already. So 4 or 5 years ago when we started this big investment, you were targeting improving the under 12s, the under 13s, 14s year by year, 1 or 2 players, just like you would do with a first team in transfer windows. And now we're seeing that the groups are as strong as anybody's. And then I think that getting the scouting right and getting the players in, plus then the facilities help keep them. That's, with good coaching, they're the 3 main ingredients.
What did you, when you joined the club, was it 2004, wasn't it? You started?
Yeah, it was, yeah, October.
What was the situation when you arrived then? Was that everyone still training at Beckenham, like the academy and the first team?
Yeah, really difficult. I mean, Ian Dowie was managing the Beckenham site. We had a dome over a grass pitch. Now you can imagine that. It got no sunlight, so it's just mud. And so that's where the players would train in the evening. And then the first team, 18s and 23s and 9s to 16s all had to use 3 pitches that weren't, to the level that they are now. So it was incredible how in that period that the club got promoted, and then we only went down on goal difference. That's what it looked like when I first come to the club. And then we moved to the sports centre, so we got the dome off the training ground, moved to the sports centre, which was a small step forward. But the facilities have always been a weakness for us that we've had to sort of work around. And it's been difficult, because I do think as well the image of the club is reflected. As soon as you walk in somewhere and it's a purpose-built building, you just think this is a big club. So I think the image of people's facilities gives people a perception. And whether that perception's right or wrong, there's still that perception there.
It does feel like now that the academy is the ownership and the chairman is their number one focus at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the early priority was to make sure that the first team stayed in the Premier League, which leads to all good things and what everybody wants. And they've achieved that and done that brilliantly. And obviously, I think the academy and then the stadium are the next 2 projects.
I just want to have a look at some of the players that have come through since you've been at the club. What do you remember about Lewis? Because Lewis Graban, he's gone on to have a great career away from Palace, hasn't he? Is that one of the things that gives you just as much pride as them breaking through at Palace?
I think so. You know, even if a player has a football league career, I think you've got to class that as a success, that you've enabled a player to get a career in one of the hardest industries in the world, in professional football. But Grabs was my first youth team. There was him and a lad called Ryan Hall, who made a debut for Palace and then went and played at Southend and Luton. But Grabs was a centre forward who loved to run in behind. When Peter Taylor took over as manager, it just couldn't quite get in the team. We had some, established strikers, Clinton, Jamie Scowcroft, John Macken, and Grabs just couldn't force his way in as a 19, 20-year-old. And I think we sold him to Millwall. I think it was a fee of about 125,000. But I've got to say, Lewis has had a fantastic career. He's played for some big clubs, and he's really maximised his potential. He's done absolutely fantastic.
And then about 3 years after you joined, it's quite a great crop of players in 2007. Lee Hills, John Bostock, Sean Scannell, who's gone on to have a brilliant career, and Victor Moses. What was your earliest memory of Victor Moses in the academy?
Earliest memory of Victor was just seeing him train and do the most outrageous things you've seen. He had the JJ Okocha scoop over your head. He had a Cruyff turn where he'd lift his arm, give some backlift, and everybody, even the crowd, would go with it to sky, and he'd be out the other side of the player. But he was, first of all, he played central midfield, Victor, as a young player, and he could play that ball from midfield inside a fullback for a winger to get wrong side and cut in on goal. But we just felt his route to the first team would be better because there's so much responsibility in midfield from a defensive angle, that he might be better suited wide because he was so attacking and so creative. But I've got to say, Victor was one of the most special talents I've ever seen. And I've classed that in the first teams that I've watched at Tottenham and at Palace. He's one of the most, gifted players, technically and skillful-wise, I've ever seen.
And what about Sean Scannell as well? Because he played loads of games for Palace, and then he's gone on to do really well as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sean was someone we were so excited about. Sean had some tough times early on. I think he lost his mum as a 14-year-old. And, so we nursed him through that, got him into the first team. And I think Sean, he had everything. He could, head the ball in the mid-third. He could head the ball in the box. He could run in behind. He had magic feet. He had good physicality. And I think Sean got caught. He was originally as a centre forward, and I think he got played wide a lot in our first team. And then that's where he spent most of his career, playing wide. And I don't know whether that positional change may have just affected the levels that he could have got to. I do think as a forward he was, outstanding. But I think looking back on Sean, where he is in his career, he's probably not achieved what we'd first hoped for him. You did think Sean could be a top-end Championship Premier League player.
What about Lee Hills? Because he burst onto the scene, didn't he, under Warnock, and then after he left the club, just kind of dropped down the leagues gradually. Can you put your finger on what happened with him?
I think Lee, he came on. He was an early developer league, and in youth football, you get guys that develop early, like Wayne Rooney, and then they can cope playing with men. From an early age, they can get into the team at 16, 17, whereas others might take a bit longer. But Lee burst onto the scene. I think his debut was at home to Watford with John Bostock. I think on a Monday night. I think John came on second half. But I think just at the time, Lee couldn't establish himself at left back here. I think he then went and played at Stevenage. Had some big injury problems, and at a critical time in his career where he's trying to learn the game at 19, 20, 21 to master his position. And then, real sadly for Lee, he ended up in non-league. But yeah, that, to be fair, Lee is someone that, probably should have played a lot higher than he ended up playing, given the qualities that he had.
But a fullback that did play at highest level, Nathaniel Klein, you signed him, didn't you?
Well, in 2004, I came from Tottenham, and Nathaniel was Tottenham at the same time, and he was travelling from Brixton, and the journey was really, problematic for him and his mother. So when I came, I was aware that it actually asked to be released from Tottenham for the travel situation, and then we brought him in. But the funny story with Nathaniel is, just before I was leaving Tottenham, I was running his team as an under-14 manager, and his mum was desperate for me to play him up front. And I had this big argument with her on the phone that, look, we think he's a right back and that's where he's going to play to a higher level. So that was sort of like my last conversation as a Tottenham employee, was arguing with Nathaniel Klein's mum about where he should play.
I felt like he didn't take any time to bed into first team football. I think I was there for his debut in the crowd, and he just looked natural from day one.
Yeah, he's one of those players that whatever level he played at was an 8 out of 10. So even in the youth team, he might not be that 9 or 10 player that catches the eye, but he was so good one-on-one. He didn't have to coach him. He got his distances, and he's a little bit like Aaron later on when he came into the first team. He'd watch the ball and never get done on a body swerve or a body movement, and would be so reliable defensively 1v1. And I think when you've watched him play for Liverpool since, he has actually added, some real quality technique into his game, which he was missing at an early age.
Obviously, the big one, Wilfried Zaha, he just goes from strength to strength. I think we talked about it once before, but just refresh your memory about that. It was the Newcastle game, wasn't it, in the FA Youth Cup? That's when because he'd been a sub a lot before that, hadn't he? And that's when he really kind of burst into the youth team.
Yeah, either the transition when you come from schoolboy to full time is sometimes, it takes a little while for players to get used to the full time training, feeling tired, the demands, the ruthlessness of the professional game as well in terms of selection. And so Wilf hadn't played. He was playing as a forward at the time, or a number 10 in the youth teams. And I think Nathaniel Pinney was keeping him out the side. But we then played Fulham at home in a league game. 1-4-2, Wilf was excellent. And then we started our Youth Cup campaign. I think we beat Cardiff in the early rounds. And from there, he just stayed in the team. But Newcastle away, we lost 4-2 on the night. But he won 2 penalties and absolutely terrorised their back four. And that was, when you were coming back on the bus thinking, he's got a major chance of playing in our first team this player.
I spoke to Tony Popovich a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about Dougie with Wilf in the early days when Wilf was first coming into the first team, and how he handled him really well. Has it been good to have Dougie back at the club and overseeing the academy and the development of players?
Yeah, I think it's, having a technical director is the way forward. Many clubs have adopted it, and I think we've had 3 now in my time here. But obviously having Dougie in that role, Dougie's done everything. He's played, he's managed, he's coached. So as a technical director, his CV is outstanding. And I think it's having that relationship with him where you can be honest and talk to him. And I do think he was certainly I remember him coming up to watch a training session with Papa one Thursday afternoon, and he picked Wilf out. He said, "Who's that? That boy's got something." And even when he was a senior player and a coach and a manager at the club, he was always interested in the youth setup, and he's continued that since he's come back. As technical director.
Are there any players that you can't believe it didn't work out for, like players that were like head and shoulders above everyone at the age of 14, 15, and then it just hasn't worked for them, but either because of injuries or stuff outside of football?
Yeah, I think there's one player that the supporters might know, but there was Ashley Robinson. He was a player that made his debut, I think, at Colchester at home. And Ashley was in Sean and Victor's group, and he was a wide right player in absolutely everything. And we got to the end of the season under Neil Warnock, and I think Neil offered him 1-year contract to stay because there'd been a little bit of issue about his fitness levels at the time. But he had everything. He could dribble, shoot, score, run harder than anybody else, cover more distance, and wonderful 2-footed quality as well. But Ashley had got involved with someone who was advising him, and he believed he could go and get a 2-year contract at another club. And I remember being in the car park with him on the last day of the season, saying, actually, make sure you sign the 1 year. Don't rely on someone who's telling you that they've got a deal if it's not on the table. And unfortunately, he left us in that pre-season and didn't come back. And I don't think his 2-year contract materialised at the club he thought he was going to, and he ended up playing non-league. But he was a wonderful player.
Yeah, because it's him who tweeted about it, isn't it? Wasn't it? Didn't he say?
That's right.
I'm on this thing or something with Fulham.
Yeah, it made it onto Radio 1, I believe. And so, but really gutted because he was, when you talk about talent, he had that Paul Gascoigne stamp where he had a barrel chest and was so strong and could get the other side of people with his quality and his sort of like forcefulness. But yeah, I think at every club there'll be stories like.
Actually, talking of barrel chest, Hiram Boateng, he was great.
Straight back.
He's done brilliantly, hasn't he? In the League One and League Two.
That's it. I think in his time with us, he had a loan at Plymouth where he done very well. Got to the playoff final. They lost to Wimbledon. But yeah, he's establishing himself in League One, and Hiram could be one of those players that it takes a long time for most players to reach the Premier League. Sometimes you reach the Premier League as a senior when you're 29, 30, 31. So that might be the path that Hiram follows. But he's a wonderful left foot, real quality passer and can receive the ball in tight areas. So hopefully, he continues doing well in League One and maybe gets himself back into the Championship with his next move.
Yeah, he had some good loans. There's the changing of the loan window. Has it affected players' development? Because they can't just, in the past, clubs could be struggling, they could need extra players and they could just call someone in for the last 5 or 6 games of the season and that might help a player's development. But now all decisions have to be made by the end of August or the end of January.
Yeah, I mean, that was a FIFA rule that was brought in 2 years ago. I think the English league is like no other, where we have 92 clubs, where most other leagues, only have 2. So I think the loan system isn't as necessary across the world as it is in England. But I do think since it's been in, League One, League Two clubs have now probably kept bigger squads because they can't rely on the loan market, which I think has affected the amount of players that can go out on loan. But you're right, the ability to send someone somewhere for 6 weeks, and if it wasn't working out, they could come back, or if it was to work out, off they go and they're up and running. With that situation now not available to us, it has become more difficult to acquire the right loan for the right player.
So just to finish off with, feels bad because we talked about a negative there, but it is exciting. You mentioned the under-16s. It is an exciting time, really exciting time for the academy at the moment, isn't it? With the new facilities, great players coming through, and then the recent example of Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who's like playing for Man United. It's a good time for the Palace Academy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's in terms of the players and the quality of the groups that we got, within the academy, it's really exciting. And the facilities, I think, is the final piece in the jigsaw now. So many people work hard. The scouts that go out every Sunday, trawling park pitches, trying to find the next player that's going to help our first team. But it's a real team effort. And it's something that hopefully now we can become one of the best academies in the country.
Perfect. I think we'll leave it there.